Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian. Welcome to Bird Bomb's helpful burst of ID info. And tonight we are on episode 25 of Bird Bombs, and I'm joined by Laura Stedman, who will be with us later for our Let It Fly segment. And we have some time at the end for any questions or comments you might have. So be ready to send those in when we get to that part. But right now, let's begin our spring shorebird salute. Okay, everybody stand at attention. Our spring shorebird friends are beginning to pass by, and let's take a look at these wonderful birds that make this such an amazing part of the birding season are the shorebirds. Now, can you identify all of these birds? Just first glance, kind of looking through. Some of them might be a little bit challenging. You might have to look a little bit critically at some of them, and some are a little easier. But oh my goodness, what a parade of fabulous birds we have during the spring. So there are actually 41 species of shorebirds that have been recorded in Colorado during the spring. And 14 of those are rare. Some really rare, like just one or two records, and some are really like the Hudsonian Godwit, not that rare, but you have to get lucky to see one. Now, there are 27 species that are regular or expected, and that is what we have in our beautiful array of shorebirds right here at the beginning of our spring shorebird salute. All right, so this is indeed a salute to spring beauty. I think one of the most wonderful parts about the spring season for birding really is our shorebird species. They're arrayed in their finery or getting close to it. And it may not be as bright and colorful in most cases as, say, warblers or tanagers or like that, but very, very beautiful birds. Now, as we look at these birds coming across the screen, can you identify them? Do you know what they are right off the bat? Maybe some you do, maybe some will work on that. But I am going to focus tonight on the spring season. So most of the images we're going to be looking at are from the period of March to June, essentially, usually May. And they are birds that are in breeding plumage is something I want to emphasize tonight because a lot of the birds we see at this season are in that wonderful alternate plumage that's so beautiful. So we want to make sure we're aware of what the details are with that so that we can really at least appreciate it when we see it. So the shorebirds that occur in Colorado fall into three different families. And so there is no shorebird family, but things that we call shorebirds, at least of the ones that occur in Colorado, they fall into three families. There's the stilts and the avocets in the recurve family. All right, so recurve, like the recurve of the avocet bill, like you can see in the picture there in the upper right. So stilts and avocets in the recurve, and then the plovers in the Shorebird is the second family. And then there's a large family in the Scolopecidae, members of the Scolopecidae, which is sandpipers, phalaropes, and allies, a very large family there for Colorado representation. So again, there's 41 species listed here. Well, that's way too much for me to deal with in bird bombs, so we're going to have to trim it down. So let's set aside the recurve, our stilts and avocets. They're really distinctive. We don't need to focus on any ID tips really for those birds. And we're also going to set aside the plovers. Great birds, but we're going to do a whole other bird bombs, I hope, in August just on the plovers. So let's not deal with them anymore tonight. But we still have way too many species. I can't do that. We're going to have to thin it out. So sorry, we're going to drop out a lot of these rare species. These are ones, some of them are more regular at other seasons, short-billed dowitcher, for example. The pectoral sandpiper are both more common in the fall. In the spring, they're kind of rarities. So we're going to drop out all of these guys. And there's also two others that are not rarities, but we're going to leave them aside for this bird bombs, but we'll acknowledge them. The upland sandpiper, which is imaged here in the center, and the Wilson snipe on the right. The upland sandpiper breeding regularly out in the northeast quarter of Colorado, and the Wilson snipe, pretty widespread and familiar to all, but also pretty distinctive in its appearance. So we'll set those guys aside, and that leaves us with 18 species for this bird bombs spring shorebird salute. So here's our shorebird focus group. We see our scientific names and our four-letter codes. The four-letter codes in this case are all pretty standard. No real rule breakers there. And notice among these different Latin names that we have a lot of species in this genus Calidris. It's one of the biggest genera in Colorado in terms of species variety. And also we have several species in the genus Tringa. Okay, so we're just kind of noticing how things are distributed among those genera and these members of the sandpiper family. So as we present them tonight, let's consider them in four groups, sort of. So first we have the big birds. All right, so I've moved the willet from down among its Tringa relatives up to this big group because it is a big bird. So we have four species that are notable for their larger size relative to the other species we're looking at tonight. But at the other end of the spectrum, we have the peeps. These are the littlest guys in our array here. Now, technically speaking, a peep would be the things like least and semi-palmated and western, and not so much a Baird's. Baird's a little bit bigger, but they're also really small. So we've got them in our peeps group. And then we have so-called birds of color here, some of the more colorful ones among our group tonight. And last, the Tringas. I just love that genus name, so I kept that for my group name as well. So fabulous birds there. So this, it's important to kind of consider where are we in the bird year. So in the bird year, these birds have been on their wintering grounds, which they arrived at in late fall or mid-fall of last year. They were molting at that time or had completed a molt or were beginning a molt to get into their what's called their basic plumage. All right, so their pre-basic molt into a basic plumage is what they wear in the wintertime. And it's generally a drab plumage without bright markings, a lot of grays and unmarked, relatively unmarked appearances. But as they get into late winter, the shorebirds begin a pre-alternate molt into alternate plumage. And so by February, say certainly, and on into spring months, these birds are actively molting and acquiring their alternate plumage that we also call their breeding plumage. All right, so the pre-alternate molt produces the alternate plumage. Now here in Colorado, we see birds in various states of molt. They're moving to where they're going and they're molting as they're doing it to varying degrees. So in the beginning part of the season, depending on the species, you might see them a little more towards the basic end of the spectrum, like maybe right now, versus later in the season as we get into late April and May, more birds are in more of a full alternate plumage. The brightest ones that we see are often in the later part of the season. And know that some of the young birds, the birds that are just entering into their first breeding season, may not attain full colors. So the important message to remember is you can see birds in an array of plumages, but most of them are in or transitioning to the alternate plumage or breeding plumage. So one of the things that I think is especially exciting about spring migration is that it is kind of short. Fall migration, it takes a long time. The whole thing is more relaxed, spread out over maybe 5 months, as you can see on the graph here. But spring migration is packed really into about 2.5 months, maybe 3 months. And you can see that it's much tighter on the graph. And so that's because the main reason for that is the birds are wanting to get up to their breeding grounds on time, which generally means the first available time that they can relative to winter and habitat conditions. And so that's a principal thing driving their timing and pushing them forward at a faster scale. And indeed, some of these birds, many of them are going long distances to reach their breeding grounds. I have an image here with the white-rumped sandpiper map and a pretty image of the white-rumped sandpiper. You can see it just in its normal distribution, skirts along the eastern edge of Colorado. So it's a special bird for us here, sometimes coming up along the Front Range, but a great example of a long distance migrant going from way in far south Argentina coastline area here in South America up to as far north as they can get there in Canada. So fantastic long distance migrants for many of our species. And each of the species has its own pattern of occurrence as the season progresses. This is true with all birds. So here we're focused on our status and distribution idea. So the what, when, where, and why kind of questions. And each species has its own pattern in which we can expect to see them and which they occur. And some of the species will peak in migration earlier in the season. So this graph is showing us how many species are peaking in each of the weeks of spring migration. So we see a pronounced peak there in late April and early May, but there are a small number of species that peak earlier in the second week and third week of April, just the time we're heading into right now. There'll be species like the long-billed curlew, I think is the earliest peaker in Colorado, so to speak, and then the Baird's, lesser yellowlegs, greater yellowlegs our early season peak species. That doesn't mean you won't see them later, but that's when the greatest numbers will be around as per usual. There's quite a few species that peak in the middle of the season. Late April, early May is the tops time for shorebirding in Colorado if you want variety, because many species are at their peak in that time. And the late ones are maybe just beginning, and the early ones are still there, maybe, but you have a lot of species in the middle, as you can see listed there. And then there's some really cool ones that bring up the tail end of the migration spectrum, kind of late end specialists in some cases. I call attention particularly the white-rumped sandpiper, which we'll see in a little more detail before long. But they are not really present in Colorado before about the second week of May, or maybe just a little bit before that. And they peak all the way in the last week of May. And it's regular to see migrants here in Colorado in June. So that's a really neat one. I love how they just come at the end of the season. So let's look at the first species, couple species from our big group. And these are the biggest and the brownest. So we have the long-billed curlew above and the Whimbrel below. So the curlew really is a big shorebird. As we think about shorebird size, let's keep in mind that on average, for most species, females are bigger than males. It's often something you can discern a little bit, but it's not something to worry about too much in the field. But there is that reality. Females are a little bit bigger than males, and they sometimes have longer bills than males, and the bill may be curved a little bit more than a male's bill, things like that. So we'll just kind of be aware of that. We're not going to worry about that too much for our ID features here, but the curlew is a really big bird, about the size of an ibis. So we're getting really up there. Notice that they have a head pattern, but it isn't very distinct. And if you look down at the Whimbrel below, it is also has a head pattern, and its head pattern is a little more distinct. So right away you have a little pattern difference. But what do you notice most about these two birds is they have long bills that curve down. And one of them, of course, the long-billed curlew is exceptionally long-billed. The Whimbrel, shorter billed, still a long bill. Notice the shape of the curves of the bill is a little bit different. The curlew has a little gentler curve that seems to spread out over a longer distance of the bill. The Whimbrel's bill is usually a more sharper downward curve, kind of giving it a little more intense expression, I think. The long-billed curlew is one of the birds we can consider as one of our orange birds compared to the Whimbrel, which is kind of brownish. But before I go any further, let's take a look at our species map real quick. And we're going to add in our two other big birds here, the marbled Godwit and the Willet. And what we can notice that these all have a nice pronounced peak there in spring, and they're all a lot less common in frequency terms over in the fall end of migration. In fact, the Whimbrel barely occurs in Colorado during the fall. So a little interesting there. So as we look at a few more pictures here, we'll appreciate that cooler brown coloration of the Whimbrel and the buffier, almost orangey coloration in some situations, some lighting, some parts of the bird for the long-billed curlew, especially in flight. The long-billed curlew can look quite orangey versus the Whimbrel's brown tones. So whenever you have flying shorebirds, one of the things they like to do is to call. So I'm not presenting the calls here in this bird bombs. You can listen to them on your recording, but you'll hear birds flying as they're migrating. And it's a great way to find them sometimes is to pick out their call. The curlew and the Whimbrel each have their distinctive calls that they give in flight. So in this case, these are two species that really don't look a whole lot different in the spring than they do at other times of the year. There are some differences between juveniles in the fall and adult birds, but the adults of both species have only subtle seasonal differences in appearance. So they basically look like they do here pretty much all the time. So we have the contrasting face patterns, some differences in bill shape, and some color tone differences. The Whimbrel is not quite as big as the curlew, but it's still quite a big shorebird, about the same size generally as the marbled Godwit. So we'll shift to our other two big, robust shorebirds. So the Godwit is pretty big. Now the Willet is ratcheting it down a little bit, but it's still a large shorebird, bigger, say, than a black-necked stilt, or in that same general size range as a black-necked stilt. So what do you notice right away on these birds? One is that the Godwit, now you got to consider lighting, but the Godwit is kind of an orange tone bird, right? It's one of our most orange birds. In fact, even part of the bill is orange or pinkish orange. the base of the bill. And the willet is much a gray bird. All right, so in fact, the willet even has gray legs. The Godwit has usually dark appearing legs, blackish legs, and they use those legs to good effect, wading out fairly deep out into the water, and that bill, which can go down deep into the substrate as well. And you'll often see them, face deep out in the water, and the bill all the way down in the mud. The Godwit's bill is bicolored. And that means it has a pale base, in this case, a paler base, which is kind of orangey pink, and then a blackish outer part. The Willet's bill is more solidly colored, just dark and quite stout. Notice the little upsweep on the Godwit's bill. It's kind of a subtle thing, but easy to appreciate if you're looking for it. Godwit's showing very orange when you see them in flight. Their upper parts in alternate plumage have this nice barring, almost like like tiger stripes or something like that. Those contrasting light and dark bars on the upper parts, and then those nice finer bars on the upper parts. So when we see them in say September or late August, we see a Godwit. It doesn't have all that nice extensive barring underneath. So beautiful to see them this time of year. The Willet's situation is to get spots on the neck and bars on the sides and spots up on the back. And Willets always kind of remind me of these little Star Wars jobs here, these kind of gray things that are going along. And the Willet, especially when you see a Willet with smaller shorebirds, it's like having one of these things amongst different Star Wars characters that are running around beneath it. Because the Willet's a pretty big bird, and it kind of has that forward hunch. And notice, though, that when they fly, it's a dead giveaway as to what they are, as a bold black and white wing pattern. But when the bird is landed and does not have its wings open, you don't see that at all. Now, if it stretches its wings, which if you're watching a flock that's sitting still, eventually one will raise up its wings or something like that, and you'll have a chance to see that bold pattern. But notice a bird that's fairly large, kind of stout in bill and the straight bill, and the gray is the overall tone for our Willet friends. Here's some Godwits and Willets flying together, and Godwit and Willet feeding together up in the upper right. So you can kind of get a sense of their size differences. The Willets, of course, very easy when you see them fly, so beautiful. But let's go from some of our big birds down now to some of our small ones. We're going to start with two little brown peeps. So we've got the Baird sandpiper and the least sandpiper. So we've scaled way down on the size. When we're looking at these birds at a shorebird spot, all of a sudden we're saying, hey, there's some really little birds there, and they're quite a bit smaller than those big ones we've been looking at. Dramatically different sizes, even for birds in the same family, Scolopecidae. All right, so the Baird sandpiper and least sandpiper are both brown birds. So they have brown at the breast and they have brown tones above. The Baird sandpiper on the upper left image is still mostly in basic plumage. You can see a few dark feathers coming in right here. Those are newer feathers, and it's eventually going to get this pattern look. But the Baird's alternate plumage is not especially dramatic. This is one in alternate plumage, and it's not especially showing beautiful patterning as some of the other sandpipers have. What we can notice on the Baird's is these very long wings, long primary projection, give it an attenuated shape compared to this least sandpiper, which has very short primary projection, and so it has a kind of a very short little shape there at its rear end, not that long shape. The Baird's wings are much longer than the least sandpiper's wings. You can also appreciate the bill shape. So when you're looking at shorebirds, one of the basic things you want to look at is the shape of the bird, as I was just talking about with the long attenuated shape of the long-winged Bairds, but also look at the shape of the bill. Is there any curvature? How does it narrow? Is there any droop at the end? What's kind of going on? When I see this Baird's bill, I say that it's tapered and more or less straight. Right? We won't argue about too much detail there. It's more or less straight. The least bill, especially if you look at the one on the main picture here, has a kind of an open bill with something there in the end. But if you look down on this one to the right, you can see the bill tapers and it has just a slight droop at the tip. So it's a subtle difference, but it's the kind of thing you can see if you learn how to look for it. All right. So of course, one has black legs, the Baird's, and one has yellow legs. Let's consider our seasonality for these species. They're both very similar in their general seasonal distribution. We can see the least is a good deal more frequent in occurrence in the fall, in the spring than is the Baird's, but that flip-flops in the fall when the Baird's is more frequent and more numerous than the least sandpiper. But they're both pretty common as far as our small sandpipers go. So the Baird sandpiper has that kind of subtle pattern of dark centered feathers above, a little bit of patterning at the side of the breast, but pretty subtle. The least is similar, but it has some paler highlights forming some lines along the back, and generally has a warmer tone than the Baird's does. So again, not the most showy of our breeding plumage. You can appreciate here with the lines that I put up, the longer primary projection versus the short primary projection of the Baird's versus the least. All right, so now on this slide, we have 4 different species. We're got 2 little guys on the left here, semi-palmated sandpiper and western sandpiper that we'll focus on first in a moment. And then the Sanderling, a little bit bigger, kind of in the Baird size range, and the white-rumped sandpiper also a little bit bigger, not quite as big as the Sanderling. So 4 different species, notice. And let's take a look at what's going on with them during the season. We can see one of the things that gets fascinating is here in Colorado, the green line and the red line here on the graph is the western and semi-palmated sandpiper, and they very closely match each other across both spring and fall season. It's almost like somebody was trying to trace the same line a little bit sloppily. So that's really cool. They are going to sort of generally same regions of the globe. But one and when so it's just kind of neat though how that overlaps. Notice the Sanderling is scheduled a little bit later and is not so numerous or frequent in the spring as these other 2 species, but it's not a hard bird to find if you're out enough times at the peak of its season in early May. All right, so here's some other species, the white-rumped sandpiper, and I put a Baird's here on the graph and the western sandpiper just for comparison. So that's the blue and the green, normal. But notice the white-rump is way late. It is, these graphs are Colorado overall, so it shows it as not especially frequent, but the place to see them is especially on the far eastern part of the state, and where they might be somewhat numerous. And they have a very late peak. So a beautiful pattern there for the white-rumped sandpiper. So let's look a little more detail at the semi-palmated and western. We can see right away that the bills are not the same shape. These are little birds, and from a faraway distance, you may not be able to pick up some of this detail, but with a scope, you will be able to see more than you think you might. The bill on the semi-palmated sandpiper is straight and kind of has a blunt tip. The western bill is longer, and it kind of tapers to a little bit of a droop at the tip. The females have more longer, somewhat longer, and a little bit more droop bill. So you can see some noticeable differences sometimes in those individuals. But the semi-palmated straight bill to the western's longer tapered droop bill. Now, they both have kind of short wings, but there's some differences in color patterning. We see the semi-palmated is again kind of drab as far as the so-called bright alternate plumage goes, but the western has some beautiful orange patterning and this great set of triangles down underneath. I just love that. So here is some drabber western here paired with another semi-palmated. Again, look at the bill shape. These are all black-legged peeps on this page. So we're looking at black legs all around, or sometimes they just look dark. And notice the western with those little triangles shooting way down onto the flanks and the sides and lower belly area. On the nice breeding plumage western sandpiper, and it has orange highlights around its crown and its face. And over here on the scapular area is another orange set there on the western sandpiper. So beautiful orange highlights there, whereas the semi-palmated really doesn't get a lot of color. A little bit of warmer tone develops, but not as colorful. In flight, you can see this orange even in flight on the western sandpiper there. Again, look at the bill shape differences. Okay, so let's switch to the 2 on the right here, our Sanderling, which again is a little bit bigger. And these guys, if you've seen one in beaches where they winter along the coast somewhere, they're very gray and white, very pale birds, and very nondescript compared to a lot of other birds. but they've changed to become kind of washed in this brown overall in their breeding plumage, or sometimes it's gray and not brown. There's a lot of variation in the color of the Sanderling, unlike our other species that we're considering. Some of them are brown and some of them are gray, but you have that kind of wash over tone onto the head and that splotchy pattern onto the breast. Sanderlings have a straight bill that's kind of stout. It tapers just a little bit, but it's straight and fairly stout as far as the bills go. Their long wings are kind of long, but not as long-winged as the white-rumped sandpiper. It's a long-winged looking bird like our Baird sandpiper was, with the primaries projecting way out past the end of the tail. And its bill is a little more tapered than the Sanderling's bill, with a little subtle droop. So this is definitely in the small peep category, but they look to me very dapper and very nicely put together when we see them in late May and early June. And it's kind of neat. One of the great places to see the white-rumped sandpiper is at Antero Reservoir in Park County in the last days of May and the very beginning days of June, up there in the mountains. Walk that southwest side, and you might encounter some right there at your feet on their way to the high Arctic. So here we see a Sanderling here, second image of the Sanderling. It's a drabber bird that's mostly in basic plumage. And we see, just put up some more images, we see kind of a gray version of the Sanderling here versus brown. The white-rumped sandpiper is more subtly patterned bird. Notice those long streaks of marks going down the sides, sort of like the little triangles on the western, not quite the same, but way down onto the flanks. That's distinctive. The little peeps, just the western and the white-rumped sandpiper have those markings extending way down onto the flanks like that, amongst those little guys. Beautiful birds. All right, so we'll move into our birds of color, and right away what I want to do here with our stilt sandpiper, long-billed dowitcher, and spotted sandpiper is consider for a moment their graphs. And one thing we can see is that the spotted sandpiper has a big presence during the summer, which the other species we've been looking at, except for the curlew, don't have, because they're a breeding bird throughout a good part of Colorado, spotted sandpiper. But we see the stilt sandpiper relatively uncommon. Again, it's a far eastern prairie migrant is where most of them occur. We get fewer along the Front Range. And the long-billed dowitcher, not so frequent. Spotted sandpiper occurs at lots of different places, so it's pretty high on the frequency rating. All right, so we'll take a look at the stilt sandpipers here on the left. This is a bird that's bigger than those other peeps we've been looking at, in the range of just a little bit smaller than a killdeer. All right, so they're kind of long-legged. That's the stilt part, and they have a long neck, and the bill's kind of long. And these birds kind of like to be around with dowitchers often, and they feed in a similar pattern with their bill down in the water like we see dowitchers doing. So we have a medium long bill on the stilt sandpiper, and it tapers and has a distinctive droop out on the tip. See that kind of like the outer fifth of the bill droops down. And when the bird finally lifts its bill up out of the water, that's something you'll be able to see. And just like our western sandpiper, the stilt sandpiper has orange on the head, up on the crown, and on the auriculars, just like the ear patch, just like the western sandpiper had in that same area. Okay, so the stilt sandpiper in its breeding alternate plumage is just, I think, one of the most beautiful shorebirds that we have. It's one of the most exciting things for me is to see them. If you want to have the best chance, you want to get out east of the Front Range region. And it is a little bit of a later migrant, so May is their peak time. But the beautiful barring and the markings above and that orange, just fabulous birds, also going to the very high Arctic. The long-billed dowitcher doesn't go so far north. And these guys are plump and they're orange. So they go from being, just going to backtrack one slide. This bird is in mostly basic plumage. The long-billed is very drab and gray in its basic wintertime plumage. But in their breeding plumage, they're orange. They're kind of like orange balls. And they're notable for being kind of plump and hunchback. People say that it looks like they swallowed a grapefruit. Notice they're kind of round. If you had to like take drawing lessons and study a long-billed dowitcher, first thing you do is make a circle for the grapefruit, All right, so and it does pan out that way. When they're feeding in particular, they can look especially hunchback. The bill is quite long, and notice it's not all the same color. It's grayer at the base and broader at the base as well. It kind of tapers. It has its peculiar shape. So long-billed dowitcher has a distinctive feature that you're only going to notice if you see birds flying or if they happen to raise their wings. The back and upper tail coverts has or a rump area rather, has a white stripe, like a white wedge going up. Very obvious as you see them bank around in flight, and you can see the upper side. Look for that white line. Will help you identify flying dowitchers as well as the big bill. But if you're looking at a flock going by in the distance, it's a very good mark. And notice the very long bills, and when they're feeding, those bills are down in the water a lot, but they wade out fairly deep, and you can kind of tell you've got a dowitcher out there. In their alternate plumage, it really is beautiful with the barring underneath and that nice dark and orange patterning above with some white highlights. So don't overlook the dowitcher for sure. So spotted sandpiper now in the on the right. One of the things, of course, you have a breeding plumage spotted sandpiper, pretty easy identification with those spots underneath, so we won't worry too much. But there's some variation on how spotted they are. Some other things we can notice are that on the spotted sandpiper, they have both the supercilium and eyeliner prominence. So the dark line through the eye and the white line over the eye are both prominent features on the bird. And the bill is orange with a dark tip. So that's different from a lot of what we've been looking at. You have an orange bill largely with a dark tip. And of course, the spotted sandpiper has a very characteristic behavior of bobbing its rear quarters up and down. So not the whole body going down on the legs like a dipper, but just the back part of the bird, more like a pipit. All right. And when they fly, their wing beats are very shallow, not going above the horizontal. And so you get these quick, shallow bursts of shallow wing beats, very distinctive, often calling as they're flying. Beautiful alternate plumage. Notice there's spots on the upper parts as well, not just down below. They're a little more subtle against that gray, but they have some nice black spots on the upper part. Bill's a little brighter this time of year than when we see them in the fall. All right, so our other colorful birds of color, our two phalaropes, our most colorful birds out of our selection for tonight. And these are distinctive from the other sandpipers we've been considering in their foraging behavior. As you probably know, they like to swim out on the water and spin around, often in circles, raising up material in the water column that they can pick at from the surface with their long, rather fine bills. So you can see them up on the shore, and they do feed along the shoreline, but a principal way they feed is out in the water, picking at the surface, swimming around in circles, often in groups, sometimes in good-sized groups. So very distinctive. Then you want to consider which phalarope am I looking at? Well, first off, the Wilson's phalarope is a lot more common than the redneck phalarope, much more so. And it also comes a little bit earlier. The redneck is one of our later birds. So as we begin to encounter phalaropes in April, they're going to be Wilson's phalaropes. And we really won't be seeing much of the redneck until we get into the beginning part of May. All right, so a little timing difference there is notable. The Wilson's phalarope has a longer needle-like bill compared to the redneck's shorter bill. They're both very fine and they're straight, but one is longer and even finer, the Wilson's. Notice the Wilson's phalarope has a pale nape. So we're focusing on these bright breeding plumage birds on the left. And let me backtrack and note that these are both females. In the case of the phalaropes, they have a reverse sexual dimorphism where the females are the ones that are more brightly patterned among species that are sexually dimorphic, or the males and females look different. In the phalaropes, the females are more bright and the males are drabber. And the males have the role that females may occupy as well in terms of rearing the young and so forth. So we see the bright colored birds, those are the females. This bird that's to the right of the bright colored Wilson's is a bird still in basic plumage. Notice very, very basically blah, gray looking, but distinctive plump body, long necked look, and kind of small headed look. And when we see the phalaropes, we can see quite a bit of variety in plumages, some connected to the sexual differences and sometimes connected to molt. But let's worry about these breeding plumages for now, the alternate plumage. Notice the very pale crown and nape can barely see it here the way this bird's angled, but we'll see it better in some other pictures on that Wilson's. There we go. So a very pale nape coming down the back of the bird's neck is unique. All right. Makes it with this beautiful dark neck stripe and kind of a wash of reddish on the front that's not very well demarcated or set off, or even is that reddish, orangish? What is that? It's really pretty, but it's not quite as brightly marked as the redneck phalarope. So we compare to the redneck, we see a couple things are different. It doesn't have that pale crown and pale nape. Its crown and nape are dark, and it has gold stripes, gold highlights on the back compared to the rather plain upper parts on the Wilson's phalarope. So again, there's a little bit going on in the Wilson's with some darker centered feathers, but no gold stripes. So you don't got the gold on the Wilson's phalarope, you got the gold on the redneck phalarope. They're a little smaller than the Wilson's. And that's really noticeable when the two species are together. And then, of course, look at the neck. The red neck gets its name for the female's beautiful kind of orangey red, almost a red-tailed hawk kind of tail color with the sharply demarcated white throat. So in flight, we have the Wilson's phalarope with plain wings. Here's here's a male Wilson's phalarope. You can compare, they're not as brightly marked. They still have that pale nape, but they don't have the palest crown like the female does, but still have that pale nape, and the upper parts are drab. We go across and we're looking, we can see patterned upper parts on our redneck phalarope, the gold there on the back. And this picture is reminding me that one of the times that we might especially see the redneck phalaropes is during a stormy time in May, you know, when we get a storm in, say, the second and third week of May in Colorado, it can be a pretty exciting time for observing migrants. And storms bring down shorebirds that are flying during the stormy conditions and at night. And it's a great time to go look for them. And I'm recalling one occasion of hundreds of redneck phalaropes grounded on the shores of Chatfield, which is what this picture was from that flock in a very snowy day. So it was really exciting to see their migration interrupted, and all along the Front Range there were a lot. So kind of cool to think about. Notice though the kind of smaller compact shape difference of the redneck, but it has a wing stripe. So the clear white line going out the wings, whereas the Wilson's phalarope essentially not plain wings. It's important field mark difference if you're looking at flying phalaropes. And here's the female, or rather the male redneck phalarope. Again, still with some gold highlights above, but a much drabber version than the female. Dark neck, nape, light nape, right? Important difference. All right, so now it's time to put you to the task here a little bit, especially if you're looking on a real monitor and not your phone. Here you are out at a pond. I was just out here the other day, but this is a picture from last May out in Weld County. And there's a couple ponds, and this one pond had these shorebirds along the edge. And my friend Gary Witt had these nice photos. There's 4 species in this picture. Well, some of them are really obvious, right? So we were just looking at those Wilson's phalaropes, and we've got a bunch of them here with the absolutely distinctive coloration pattern there on the head and neck. So that one's kind of easy. But what else do we see? We've got some bigger birds over here on the right. And what else do you see? Okay, there's another bird on the left, another one that's bigger. So let's take a look at those ones on the right. They are kind of what color overall? Orange. They've got long bills, they're orange, and they're kind of plump. They're kind of round. So we're gonna think about our long-billed Dowitcher diagnosis there for those guys. And we'll kind of set them aside because we don't want this one on the left to get away. It's a big one, and we haven't talked about Yellowlegs, but you know, this is a pretty familiar bird for a lot of people already. The greater Yellowlegs. Notice its tall stature and its yellow legs. We'll get to that in just a bit. So is there anything else? I said 4 species. That's 3. Okay, if you're looking sharp-eyed, you're looking for some maybe some patterning differences above, something's different. Well, it's a little subtle, isn't it? And in fact, I think in the field, when we were looking at these birds, we didn't actually notice this right off. But I see some gold stripes on the back and smaller size compared to the Wilsons here. And different little throat pattern there, throat and neck pattern. Uh-oh, there goes the whole flock up in the air. And now look at that, you can see those white stripes on the Dowitchers. So that's pretty easy. And we can see some Wilson's Phalaropes we know are also fairly numerous in that flock, and they don't have a wing stripe. But is there anything different? Is there anything different? Indeed, look carefully for the smaller ones. Look for that wing stripe, and you can pick out two redneck Phalaropes here that we were just seeing before the flock took flight. Now they're going by a little different angle. And again, you can pick out the redneck Phalaropes there in the forward part of the flock, appreciating the smaller size and the wing stripe difference. It's kind of fun, isn't it, to put it all together and see what we get. But we got one last group here, so I gotta pull it together. So star-spangled tringa. I say that because to me, in their breeding plumage, even a little bit in the way we see them in the summer and fall, but in the breeding colors, it's like a starry sky on their upper parts. I just think it's fantastic. The solitary sandpiper is the kind of the drabbest of the trio here in terms of its markings. But on the lesser yellowlegs and the greater yellowlegs, I look at their upper parts, and there's always some gray feathers left mixed in there. And it's almost like you're looking at a dark night starry sky. So no city lights, and you've got the bright stars and other stuff, and then you have the dark sky patches, and then you have this gray, which is maybe some clouds that are drifting across the sky. That's how I like to imagine the star-spangled tringa. So with the solitary sandpiper and the two yellowlegs, they have a similar kind of pattern in the spring, but notice the timing is offset for the three species, interestingly. The greater is earliest, and it's also the latest in the fall out of these species. Greater earliest, lesser peaking a little later, and solitary a little later yet, and it's a little less frequent than the two yellowleg species. So the solitary sandpiper, fun little factoid is that they nest in trees, right? That's kind of fun. So this is a bird that is smaller than a killdeer and kind of a horizontal shape to them, and not as upright as yellowlegs are. And notice when you look at them, the eye ring figures prominently on the bird, not the supercilium or any eye line, but the eye ring. The bill is straight, and in good light, it's a little bit paler at the base. Sometimes it just looks dark. The legs are yellow like a yellowlegs, but they're kind of drab. So you have that prominent eye ring. The upper part's kind of dotted with stars, a little more subtle than the yellowlegs. And the solitary sandpiper has a very characteristic behavior of bobbing up and down. So it's the whole body that's going up and down, more like a dipper and less like a spotted sandpiper wagging the tail quarters up and down. So different in that way, but it has that characteristic behavior where you'll see the kind of whole body go, and it's a horizontal up and down. Yellowlegs do something a little bit different. They often will move their bodies too, but they'll tip their tail down and the head and neck go up at the same time. So it's kind of like a tip up thing of the neck reaching up and the tail kind of angling down a little bit. Different action, but all very active in that kind of movement that they have. So we'll look a little bit more at the solitary is a rather dark bird, and when we see it in flight, the underwings are dark and it presents dark above as well. They like backwater spots, places with wood, shadowy places along small drainages and things like that. And indeed, they're often solitary, but you will see them in little groups or aggregations where they find habitat they like. So our lesser yellowlegs here will note that it has both supercilium, the line over the eye, and the eye ring are both prominent. Its bill, compared to the greater yellowlegs, is on the shorter side, and we'll notice the bill is straight, and black. All right, they both look very similar on the upper parts, but the greater has more barring on the flanks than the lessers usually do. Okay, so one is bigger, the greater, one is smaller, the lesser, one has a smaller bill, the lesser. The greater's bill is longer, slightly upswept and paler at the base. So different color, different shape. Let's look at a few more of these lesser yellowlegs to appreciate. When we do see one in flight, we see a nice bright rump compared to that solitary, which is all dark there. And they walk around a lot, very active on their almost stilt-like long legs. Notice the bill shape here. Okay, nice and straight, essentially one color. And we'll compare back to the greater yellowlegs now with the longer bill that just sweeps up ever so gently. Sometimes it's a little hard to appreciate that, and there's a little bit of individual variation, but most you have a long bill with a paler base, and hard to appreciate that in poorer light and that little bit of bill shape difference. Okay. Again, the flanks of the greater being a little more extensively barred. So two species pretty similar in flight. Greater's bigger. They do make different sounds. Won't worry about that too much now. So what about this bill length difference? Well, here's the trick. It's a little savage, so if you have children around, you might want to cover their ears. But what you got to do is snap the bill off the face and you shove it through the head. And if the bill is extending beyond the back of the nape, then you have a greater Yellowlegs. And if it's just the same width of the head, then you have a lesser Yellowlegs. No, I don't really recommend trying that, and I'm just saying for fun. But there you can kind of see it graphically portrayed. Take the bill and match it to the depth of the head, if you will. And the bill is longer than, that's a greater. If it's similar than, that's a lesser. Now, there's some individuals that's hard to tell, but put together size, bill shape, and bill length, and some of these other subtle differences, it's usually pretty good. So I'm just going to toss in our Willet here. The other Tringa, just to appreciate it, does have some of the same star-spangled patterning as these Yellowlegs. So that's kind of cool to see. All right, let's take one more look at our Yellowlegs. This is a set of birds that gives people a challenge a lot. Now, they're both fairly common, so you're going to be seeing them. And it's not uncommon to see both together, especially right now in April. And they're often mixed in with other birds. So they're great birds to kind of pin down on relative size. The greater is noticeably bigger than a killdeer. The lesser is more similar to the size of a killdeer, say. The bill size and shape, remember, is a difference that we want to look at. The barring on the flanks, the different calls and things. So just from looking at bill shapes and sizes here, and of course the bird size, it's pretty easy for these pictures, right? You can tell who's lesser, who's a greater. What about this pair on the bottom right? Well, gosh, they're both greater. So I just put that in there to give you a scare. So great birds to kind of pin down. Excellent reference species to learn. Come back to that in just a second. In fact, what are some pro tips for our spring shorebirding? First thing is you want to plan for good lighting. If it's possible to consider, having the light to the side or to the back, coming at a different time of day or going to a different part of the site where you can view at a different angle, you want to do that because better lighting is going to help a lot. And then you want to try to be as close as you can. That's where a scope is desired or sometimes even necessary at some locations really to enjoy the shorebirds. If you don't have a scope, find a friend, go with a friend, or get on a field trip where a leader typically will have a scope if they're in a shorebirding situation, or other people will share. Great way to enjoy these birds well. Now, remember, the season is short, so you want to go now, and you want to go out several times all the way through May if you're able to get to encounter some of these different birds. It's a little bit like finding Easter eggs on the Easter egg hunt because you never know what you're going to find, and sometimes they're easier to find than others. So you want to get out there multiple times and check eBird for hot spots or places where the birds are occurring to get ideas of where to go. But you can also just get out there and explore. Right, so you want to find places where there's ponds and reservoirs, if there's flooded areas in fields. These kind of areas are things that shorebirds are generally looking for. When you come to a place with habitat and there's birds around, you want to scan over that habitat several times. These birds are on the move, sometimes actively migrating and dropping into your location while you're there. They may have landed in that spot over on the far right that you were done looking at. Well, you better look again. And also you want to make sure to sift through any flocks several times. So not only look at different parts of the site, but when you have a flock, you want to work through it. First, the birds are moving. It's hard to see every one when you go through one time. And sometimes birds are hiding behind others and things can change. So you want to sift through, take your be patient and look through and look at each bird. Consciously kind of look through. That's how you're going to be able to pick out something different, appreciate some of the things you want to look at. Ask yourself, what is the bird doing? Where is it feeding in the habitat? What's going on with its behavior? Take a look at the bill shape and size. What's the bird's overall size and shape and maybe color? Is it calling? And you look at this picture here, can you guess what these might be? So we went through a lot of species pretty fast. You're going to have to go back and look at the video if you're newer at this. But what I see here are some brown, small shorebirds. These are peeps. And they're brown dominant. I think I see pale legs here and just that small size and very short kind of wing shape. I'm going to call these least sandpipers. And in fact, they are least sandpipers. So, but anyway, you want to look at these kind of different features about the birds as you're looking. Don't just look for field marks. Kind of assess some of these general things about shapes and sizes of things as well. Not only does it have these orange marks or these sort of bars, and use reference species or other objects that are out there to help you compare and assess size. So other objects could be like a can that's out there along the edge of the, aluminum can, or some other object that you can compare to, or another bird. Killdeer is a great reference species. I put some sizes here, lengths in inches on the right, and in the boldface, I put some of our reference species that we might choose that are not among our focal species. That's why they're boldface, just kind of put them in for some size reference. But other shorebirds can also be a good size shorebird. So you want to learn a little bit here, make an effort to kind of sort out who's bigger, who's smaller, and really kind of see what you can do. Can you recognize the species in this picture now? So there's 5 birds, but there's 4 species. The big one, all gray, is a willet with the largely all dark stout bill. And then we have these medium-sized ones, long bill, round, kind of orange. So you should be going to long-billed Dowitcher. But these little guys in the bottom are a little harder. They're both little peeps. They both seem to have dark legs. It's a little hard to see the legs on the left, but I can see black-ish looking and not a yellow tone here. And one has orange here, crown and face, and a little bit longer bill. I think I can imagine a droop one is a shorter bill and lacking kind of color. So we got semi-palmated and western there. It's kind of fun. So the very best places to find shorebirds are going to vary from season to season with the habitat conditions, most especially what the water level is. Is there water or is there too much water? Right now, a lot of places in the spring and currently here in Colorado in general, after a good water year last year, have high water levels and less shorebird opportunities, but these birds will find the places. So you look for your flooded margins where there might be some shallower areas with vegetation. Shorebirds will look for those if they can't find mud flats sometimes. But if there's spring rains, they may flood out playas, seasonally very dry, shallow ponds that develop out in agricultural fields or out in the prairie region. Great areas to search for shorebirds if that rain happens. And anytime there's a storm situation is a good time to look for migrants that might be grounded. Southwestern Weld County and southeast Colorado are 2 key shorebird areas in spring migration. And I want to recommend the convention, the CFO convention at Lamar, coming up in early May, just a month away. You can still register, but not for too much longer. But there's going to have a lot of field trips going to some great shorebirding opportunities. So recommend that as a good way to connect. So now I'm going to invite Laura to join me here, and it's time to let it fly. And are you with me, Laura?
Hey, how's it going,
Good,
David?
good. So let me go forward, and we're going to put you back on the hot seat here. And we went through a lot, but some of this may be easier than others. But we're starting here with some twofers. So we have, by that title, we have 2 birds, but maybe we're thinking 2 different species. So
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and I always appreciate these because I feel like shorebirds are one of those things I've got to kind of like relearn a little bit
yeah,
every year when they start to come through. Oh gosh. Okay, so the first thing I see with these is the legs are that bright kind of yellowy, orangey kind of
yeah,
color. Their bodies are pretty gray. One looks bigger, one looks smaller. The bills look like different links. They have a kind of, now that you've said the like spangled look, they both kind of look a little spangly to me. So
yeah. They kind of look the
um,
same, don't they? They're very
they kind of
similar in
look the
general appearance.
same but different. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with the left as a greater Yellowlegs and the right as a lesser Yellowlegs based on all of those
Okay,
things.
cool. Yeah, indeed, you can even see the little more barring on the flanks of that greater, those spots coming down farther
Yeah.
back here. The lesser's a little lighter there. That's one of the only main plumage differences. Otherwise, it's more size and the bill element. The greater may, there's some other subtle things, but those are yeah, so that's pretty cool. Good job. So here we
Oh,
got a couple
nice.
others. Um, Kind of
Oh
hiding in
gosh.
the flooded weeds there, flooded vegetation and stuff.
Yeah. So the first thing that jumps out at me is that long bill with the orange and the black.
right in the middle and over on the right.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Although there is that bird in the middle with the orange and black, really long bill. There's one to the left of it that looks like maybe it's just a black bill.
this
And
guy.
more gray. Like now
Yeah.
that I'm looking at it more, I see those birds on the left. There's a lot of just gray. And those two birds to the right, with the orange and black bills, there's a lot more mottling, speckling, and a lot more orange picking up. So those ones on the right, that bill kind of like looks like it's upturning to me a little bit.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
kind of
gonna go
subtle, but yeah.
with like the Godwits, the marbled
Cool.
Godwits.
Okay.
And then the ones on the left. So kind of going, now we can kind of compare. We know that Godwits are like, they're not peeps, right? They're bigger.
They're big guys.
So those other ones are kind of similar-ish in size, maybe a touch smaller. It's a little hard to tell. But like they're also not peeps. But very gray, dark bill. I can't really see any of their legs. Are those, what are those gonna be? Are those willets?
Ta-da.
Whew. I was starting to think like, oh, but you just said that willets are like tringas. They're like kind of
Well, you can
spangled
see
too,
a
but
little of that on here. So these birds are not quite in full plumage, but they have that same little
oh,
pattern
okay.
of black and white coming in. Those are new feathers coming in, so they're going to get a little more spangled above. And it's a good example of that trend. You know, when you see a willet, it may not be in full plumage, and when you see one in absolute full breeding plumage, it's a stunning bird. But a lot
Uh-huh.
of the ones we see are going to be getting there and
Yeah,
not
yeah,
as strongly marked. But good, cool. So now
yeah.
we've got, in fact, here, so here we got two more.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, that big bird on the left, again, it's very gray. It's got the gray legs, it's got a long bill. It's a lot bigger than the little one. Um, so I'm inclined to guess my first sort of like gut reaction to that big one on the left is Willet.
Cool.
And then the one on the right is obviously a peep. It's got a longish bill. I feel like I see like wide at the base, and then it droops like a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I noticed kind of the brownish, the warm tones kind of popping out on that one,
Cool.
and the dark legs. So from those, I know that like I can go like probably sort that out in my field guide. Like the dark legs are helpful. But without my field guide, what is that bird? The warm tones. It
You were talking about
doesn't
the bill.
really, it doesn't really have, it's almost like trying to have warm tones on the head, but not
So we want to
really.
consider photographic lighting and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
photographic effects. But you see, it's got a patch around the eye, ear
Yeah.
area, and then a patch on the crown. So definitely
Right.
some
Yeah, so
patches.
I'm kind of thinking like I know that Westerns have a lot of warm and a lot of orange on them. So like I want to say that, but then like is it that or is it like a semi-palm? The spotting on the like chest and belly also seems to kind of go far down, and from here looks triangular-ish. So I'm gonna go with Western.
Yeah.
Whew,
So
that
indeed,
was
the
a tough
bill.
one.
Well, yeah, but you mentioned about the bill being kind of tapering and getting a little droop, and that's
Yeah,
an important bill shape difference. You're looking at one of these smallest ones
yeah.
because it's really little and it doesn't have the long wings and it doesn't have pale legs like a
Oh,
leaf. So
right.
you've
Yeah,
got only those two. So bill shape, and then thanks for noticing those streaks coming way down, kind of onto the flanks even a little bit,
yeah,
which is characteristic of our Western. So
yeah.
great.
I,
So
I
one
I almost
more.
feel like I need like a spreadsheet of like different checklists, different checks for features.
Well, okay, that's what Merlin does. He'll have a
Yeah, I
spreadsheet.
guess I guess so. Okay, so the first thing I see is Phalarope, right? That bird in the back that's got its head up, looks like a Wilson's Phalarope to me. So that's kind of my comparison individual for the rest of them. And the rest of them, you know, at first glance, they all look like it's just a big group of Wilson's Phalaropes. That one right there in the middle, the focus of that photo though, doesn't look like a Phalarope at all. It's
Different
got
shape.
different shape. Its bill is stouter and shorter looking, maybe a little bit of an angle thing, but it's thicker for sure. It doesn't have that same neck like a Phalarope. It does have dark legs. Maybe even shorter than the Phalarope, maybe a touch. So, but relative, like similar or slightly smaller size. So we know we're dealing with something fairly little. It's no Willet, no Godwit. So thinking about like our kind of peeps area, I see a little bit of patterning on the back, but nothing major. There's nothing coming down the like chest and belly in terms of spotting. The bill doesn't look like it droops a ton.
No.
But maybe a little. Is that a Sanderling?
Good job. So a good example of like, imagine you might have had maybe this Wilson's flock is really like 40 or 50 Wilsons, and you kind of have to sift through because you might not notice that bird just looking at it a little bit briefly. Sanderling also has a kind of a blank look to its face when it's in that kind of full breeding plumage. And by the time they get to us here in Colorado, which is mostly in May, most of them are in a pretty good plumage. Even though you still could have one that's in more towards a basic plumage, but a lot of them are looking like this, and they can kind of throw you initially because they do look different. So here's some orange birds, and I think this could be kind of a hard one.
Well, so with the Sanderlings, I know that like when I've seen them like in on like the Gulf Coast, they kind of tend to do like they kind of just like run along the shoreline. They're like always running. Do they tend to do that out here too? Like,
Not the
are
same
they going to
way.
act like a Phalarope or
Like
they're going to act like a Sanderling?
they're more sedate because they don't have to run away from waves and chase
They're not
down
running in
the waves.
circles.
No, they will mostly be on shoreline edges, but they won't be running around the same way. They're a lot more.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Unless it's really windy and you got really big waves.
All right. Okay, so we've got three different birds here. Probably different camera zooms, different we've got three different photographers. So let's look at number one first. Okay. So these two birds, they don't like lighting differences like can play into these photos, right? But the two birds on the right, I see a lot of orange. These birds on the left, they look there's like a little bit of buffiness, but not like they're not screaming orange to me. They've got their bills tucked, which isn't helpful. But they've got dark legs, so we know that.
So now the color is kind of an orange color, don't you think? Now I'm looking at the lighting angle. I'm seeing the light coming from the side here, and in this particular way, it seems like it's gonna kind of lighten our view a little bit, but it's not white or gray, right?
No,
So
it's not
definitely
gray.
kind of something on the warm tone.
And they look bigger. They look heftier, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this Godwits.
Could be. I forget how I have the answers written on this slide.
Okay, we'll do the other two first.
I don't want to give them away
we
by
can click the
mistake
button.
in case they're not.
All right. So moving on to number two, I definitely see orange on this. The tail is really short on that one. And their head is all the way in the water. And I can kind of just imagine that bird like doing the sewing machine thing. So I'm going with Dowitcher. Longbill Dowitcher on that one.
Look how round it is also. It kind
It
of
is. You're right. You mentioned the
like it's a little
grapefruit.
balloon.
Yeah,
Little
that's just a
balloon.
chunky little bird. Okay, and so then the bird on the right, also kind of orangey. It looks tall. It looks big. It doesn't look like a grapefruit. It looks more like a blimp. Um, this is big.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe it's puffed up, but yeah, it's the bill is dark. You can see that much. Um, with the bill facing like almost directly towards us, it's kind of hard to get a sense of what's going on, but it looks like it's curved down
Sometimes they
to
help by
me.
making the bill easier to
There we
see.
go.
There we
Yeah.
go. I know you were
So
heading
yeah,
towards
so
long-billed
curlew.
curlew. Yeah, with the bills not in view, it's surprising how challenging it can be. But you noted at the beginning that we couldn't really assess size here completely because they're, of course, scaled differently for the
Yeah.
photos, and the lighting can play into it as well. Um, but you still have features you can look at even if you can't really get much out of the bill. So that's fun. I like these ones.
Yeah.
Good
I
job.
like that patterning on the Godwit.
It
This is
really is
really cool.
something. Yeah, it almost reminds me of like a fern kind of a pattern.
Uh-huh.
Really pretty. Uh-oh, so now
Oh
here's what most
gosh.
birders don't like is to look at two little ones. The lighting's not optimal, but it's not terrible. But the littlest
Uh,
ones, and they're looking back at you saying, "Forget it, you're not gonna make."
yeah, two peeps, and call it a day, right?
Okay, if you want, we
Yeah.
could do that. But we can
Uh,
consider bill shape, leg color,
yeah, yeah.
overall color aspect, relative size, maybe some other.
Yeah, so we've got some peeps. That one on the left, it doesn't look particularly like the warm orangey tones to me. So we've got something there that doesn't have like orange like the Western would.
Okay.
And it looks bigger than the one on the right. The right one looks smaller. The one on the left has kind of a stouter and short bill versus a slightly longer and droopy bill. So seeing that. Yeah. Oh, there we go. So they're not Western. So what are our other options? So we've got Western, Baird, semi-palmated, least, and white-rumped. I think we talked about today. And then maybe something special that we didn't talk about that,
Yeah.
but
Rarity.
maybe not. Sometimes you trick me, sometimes you don't. Gosh, okay. So I don't think either of these are Western. The one on the
Well,
left has a very tapered look. Um, so which ones have a tapered look? Baird's do, but that one doesn't really look like a Baird's to me. It's got that really like they both have really like flat foreheads.
okay.
So who has a flat forehead? Is the left one well,
Are there any other differences you can look at that one looks one way and the other's different?
the one on the right looks darker, maybe warmer.
So let's look at our list of things
There's
to
the
consider.
face,
What about our second item on
light color.
the face is a good thing to look at too. It's a little more detailed because they
Yeah.
do have subtle differences in pattern among the species, but
Neither of them have like yellow legs that I can really tell.
well, look carefully at all
Can
four
I?
legs.
All
Or,
four legs? I
well,
only see three legs.
okay, one's hard to see, but a little back here behind you can see black, but so dark,
That's
right?
dark.
And
Yeah.
dark behind, and then this one looks dark, but what about this one?
And that leg looks lighter, but
It's
maybe
certainly
it's
not.
maybe it's my screen, but I don't really see
Okay.
like bright
All right.
yellow
Well,
on
we'll
it, right?
leave.
Yeah.
Well, but now, okay. All right. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think?
Is that one on the right, is that a least? And okay, semi-palmated. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah. So the lake color is interesting here because it can be difficult to judge in the field or
Yeah.
in a photo you want to consider is something kind of shadowed, like this left-hand least leg is a little bit shadowed, I think is why it looks dark. To me, this
Ah,
the
yes,
the
good
the
call.
bend here is darker looking, but there is definitely something that's not blackish here.
Sure.
So and
Okay.
down here. So that takes me to a not a black looking leg, which is the other little peeps.
Okay.
And that is provided you consider lighting and all that. And distance can sometimes make it hard to evaluate, but at a far away distance, you could compare these and say one definitely looks darker than the other, even if you
Hmm.
have a hard time deciding, is it really black? Is it a little bit yellow? What is it?
Yeah.
And kind of go there. So cool with
Okay.
those guys. And so here's going to be our
Oh
last quiz
no.
shot here. And I put in the answers for many of these, but not all of them. And just real quick, see if you can kind of figure out. You can start with the easier ones. I think are on the left.
Okay. So that number one looks like a long-billed curlew to me.
Cool, good.
Number three, that looks like a Godwit.
Okay.
So number two, oh gosh, what else did we talk about that? Is that a long-billed Dowitcher there?
For number two,
Yeah.
curve bill.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm
Uh,
starting to like, there's so many shorebirds, I'm starting to mix
yeah,
them up in my head.
this was a cruel way to end it. So
Okay.
it's one of our big brown guys. There is number
Oh,
two.
Whimbrel.
Yeah,
That's the one
Whimbrel.
I'm missing. I
Yeah,
was like, oh, there's one I can't think of. Okay.
didn't come into
So
your head.
so one is Curlew, two is Whimbrel, three is Godwit.
Yep.
Okay, so four, five, and six. Oh, did you organize these? I see you've organized these in a way. So I'm gonna jump over to eight. That's a greater
Okay.
Yellowlegs because we've got the lesser there. So that's helpful. Um, so seven is going to be the Dowitcher.
Sounds good.
Yep, it's got that long bill. It's not decurved. That makes sense. So four, five, and six, we're looking at like Western semi-palm and least,
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Everybody else is
Everything else is
accounted
on
for.
here. Yeah. Oh gosh. I
Which one has a blunter, straighter bill? Four, five, or six?
uh, four looks straight but not blunt. Five looks very short and stocky. Is that our
Yeah.
semi-palm?
Yeah. Five,
Yep.
semi-palm, good. So
So
we're
four, I'm guessing, is the least, and six is the western.
good job. That's a
Oh
tough one.
gosh.
All right.
I'm
So
gonna have to
you
like go
made
and
it.
play that again.
Yeah. You made it through though. Good job, Laura. And
Ah,
we'll finish up with our let it fly here and I'll conclude our bird bombs tonight by thanking the many photographers who have made their images available for me to use in bird bombs. Without the photographers, the bird bombs wouldn't happen. So I really appreciate all of you who have helped me by giving me permission to take your images, which I can easily get from eBird. Hopefully all the images are credited on each of the slides here. Thank you, everyone. And we're ready to look ahead to our next bird bombs already coming up on May 9th. It's Spring into Warblers 2. So the very first bird bombs I did 25 episodes ago, I can't believe it, was called Spring into Warblers. And I'm going to redo that one, revamp it, revisit it, and it's going to be really awesome. And so tune in for our next bird bombs. We'll take a quick moment for any questions or comments you might have. Laura can help with that. I'll stop my screen share.
yeah. And if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and I'll catch them. Lynn asks, well, first she says, wow, shorebird overload, and I think we're all feeling that. I know I am right now. What are the top hotspots to see the most variety of shorebirds? Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, so the key is some of the things I said is that it varies with the year-to-year habitat changes relative to water level. So some areas that might be really good one year may be dry in one spring, or they've drawn down the water in the reservoir and there's nothing, or there may be too much water. So that's one variable. But some of the reservoirs in the southeast part of the state, areas around John Martin Reservoir, in the Queens Reservoirs, SWA, and there's a number of different places there, are some of the very best in Colorado. If there are playas that are flooded in the spring, there's going to be particular ones that birders will find that have a lot of shorebirds going on, and that can be really exciting. Closer to the Front Range edge, some of the places at the Arsenal are good. Lake Ladora and some of the other ponds there, and Loggerman Reservoir in Boulder County can be good. And there's what I would say is look at eBird and what's going on, pick out one of the species and see where it's turning up, and that'll clue you into the places that have good habitat conditions right now.
Yeah. I would definitely say for Boulder, Loggerman tends to be the go-to spot that people just, it's like, even, and you can see that migration, like even within a day, that what people see changes throughout
So
the
you
day,
want to
which
go
is
out at
just
different
wild.
times. Yeah, if you want to see variety, you have to go out at different times. Oh, the other places that are really good, a lot of ponds in the southwestern portion of Weld County, like a place called eBird hotspots, like Lower Latham Reservoir, Stewart's Pond, Loloff Reservoir. Other hotspots around there are going to be places with water that shorebirds like right now.
I always love a trip to Lower Latham in the spring for shorebirds. That's great. Let's see. Ajit asks, are there different locations to see large numbers of shorebirds? So he's not asking variety, but large numbers of shorebirds in spring.
The general answer is that where there happens to be a lot of good habitat is where there's going to be a lot of birds. And so it's probably going to be a bigger reservoir that has the water drawn down sufficiently that there's good shoreline margin. Not all reservoirs are full in the spring necessarily, but some of the where I've seen the best numbers have been when conditions are good at places in the southeast part of the state. Out on the prairie, we're more in the heart of their flyway zone in the eastern edge of the state than we are towards the Front Range. So there's just more shorebirds out there.
Sure. Do you know, like, I was down in Otero this past weekend and the reservoirs looked full. Do you know when they like start drawing down them at all, or is that just like
it's a complex thing that doesn't have a short answer. I mean, there's to some degree, there's things are lower in the late summer and fall than in the spring, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way, the way water gets moved around. But that is a general pattern. Beyond that, it's going to depend on the management of the location and what water is available and things like that. So it's complex, but even when the reservoirs are all full, there's going to be some places, some nooks and crannies around that are going to offer habitat. And the shorebirds will find the little vegetated edges of these flooded reservoirs that some of them, like Ninoche Reservoir, is could be a very large body of water. And even if the water is not leaving exposed shoreline, there's places where shorebirds are going to find nooks and crannies. So don't give up hope even at
awesome. Let's see. And Scott asks, is there any chance for a stilt sandpiper on the trip Monday, or is it still a little early? I assume you've got a trip going on Monday.
We're definitely going to see some shorebirds, and we'll be going to those places, Weld County I was just talking about, but we're too early for a stilt sandpiper, I'm afraid. Well, there is a lot of now are both the Yellowlegs, there's some Bairds, there's leaf sandpiper, are some of the ones that are prominent right now.
Awesome.
But there'll be some variety.
Cool. And I've got a question for you, kind of wrapping this up. Well, this is a two-part question. One is, are there other bird bombs on this topic if we want even more? And then two, do you have advice for kind of identifying these birds and picking them apart in the field?
Yes, I did do two bird bombs back 2 summers ago. The first one was called It Has Yellow Legs, and the second one right after was called The Little Pipers. And if you go to the DFO page, dfobirds.org, and go to the programs and events and scroll down below the upcoming programs, you'll find a button that gets you to an archive of all the videos for bird bombs. And you can scroll down and get to It has Yellowlegs and the little pipers, and that covers some of the same birds we were talking about tonight, but it's focused on the fall migration period and not the breeding colors. So it's the thing is that a lot of the IV points are really structural and not necessarily plumage related. So it's very useful even for this time of year to look at that one, but it is oriented more towards fall migration. When you go out in the field and you see shorebirds, the first thing you're asking yourself really is how big is it and what's the shape and what's it doing. Those things kind of become your filter for how you're going to approach the ID. Is it a really little bird? What's it compared to? You know, or is it a long-legged, taller bird? And once I can start to sort it out into the different groups, then I can narrow it down and consider what I might be looking at. And to the degree that you can, you want to look at things like leg color and bill color and overall pattern on the birds and look for some distinctive features. But it's really the kind of comparing among different things to kind of narrow it down is a good way to begin when you're out there looking.
Awesome. Well, thanks, David. This is
All
helpful.
right. Yeah, and we will hopefully have the video up shortly for this, and you can review. And I hope you get out there this spring and enjoy some shorebirds at the CFO convention or our DFO field trips or just out on your own. Good night, everyone. I'll see you on May 9th for Spring into Warblers 2.